Hey, what's up everyone? Happy Thursday afternoon or whatever time of day it may be where you are. We're doing a practice along today on some more chord progressions. So we're just going to be looking through some chord progressions that I like to use. We're actually going to be working in some of the more major sounding keys today because I've been doing a lot of minor, kind of moody minor stuff. And I've actually just been playing around with this progression, which is called the 1, 5, 6, 4 progression, and I'll explain what I'm talking about there. Because I've been learning and playing around with the Beatles' Let It Be. And Let It Be uses it uses one of the most common progressions of all time. It's used everywhere, so we're going to be looking at what those chords are. So I'm in the key of C, so I don't have to worry about any black keys. And I called that the 1, 5, 6, 4 progression. So what does that mean? It's pretty simple. If you think back to your C major scale, think back to your C major scale, you have 8 notes in that scale. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then your 8th is the octave. It's back on C again. So, if you ever hear someone say, you know, go to the 4 chord, or go to the 5 chord or something, maybe you're like doing like a jam, and they say something like that. What they mean is go to the chord that's built off of the 4th note or the 5th note in that in the scale of the key that the song is in. So this 1, 5, 6, 4 progression, you can think of it as a formula that you can use you can apply it to any key on the piano, and you're going to get the same sounding chord progression. Obviously, it's going to be sort of pitched up or down, but yeah, that's why it's so useful to consider your chords as numbers. So let's look at what this is now. So if I'm in the key of C and I have a 1 chord as the first chord, obviously that's going to be C major because that's the first note of the scale. And then it went 1, 5. So your 5 chord, just count up 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that lands us on G. So our 5 chord is G. So C to G, and then we had a 6 chord after that. So count up 6 notes now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we are. That's an A. And because we're working with the key of C major, we don't have any of these black keys to worry about. This A, if we build just a chord out of just the ingredients of the C major scale, it's a minor chord. It's a minor triad. So that adds a really cool color to this chord progression because you have a major 1 chord, a major 5 chord, and then your 6th chord is a minor chord. And then that lands us on the final chord of this progression, which is going to be that 4 chord. So count up again, start on C. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's an F chord. It's going to be an F major triad. And then we repeat that progression. So C, aka the 1 chord, down to G, aka the 5 chord, up to A minor, aka the minor 6 chord, down to F, aka the 4 chord. And then you can repeat that. So we're going to practice that right now. We're going to practice that to the metronome. I'm going to set myself at 80 BPM, and we're going to start off just practicing this in its root position, so just like how I demonstrated it. That means we got to kind of have to do these jumps around because we're just kind of taking our hand as a claw and we're moving it around the piano to make those chords. Then we're going to look at some chord inversions to make this a little more smooth. So let's give it a whirl. 1, 2, here we go. So we're going to play half notes. So that means 2 clicks to this beat. Here we go. To A minor, F, back up, down to G, just keep going with that till we're nice and comfortable with the distance between each chord. So there's almost this leapfrog thing, the way we're moving, because we start on C, then a big jump down to G, then just a little tiny hop to A minor, and then a jump down to F. And if you're finding this to be hard to coordinate both hands, you can just play the right hand. Or if you want to get your left hand a little bit into the action, just play the root notes. G, A minor, to F. And maybe as you start to get more comfortable, we could switch to playing these as quarter notes. So we're going to try that. Here comes the quarter notes. Last time. Okay. So that progression, like I said, that's the Let It Be progression. It's also, those 4 chords find their way into so many songs across so many genres. It's, you know, all through history you'll be hearing that progression, so keep your ears out for it. So that's just jumping around in the root position. But if you've been practicing piano for a little while, you've probably recognized that that's not the most efficient way to travel from chord to chord. The most efficient way to travel from chord to chord is using inversions. And all that means is taking the ingredients that make up the chord and reordering the notes so you can play them as different shapes on the piano. So just in the simplest form, we're going to take our very first chord that we learned, C major. Here's our C major chord in root position. So we have the main name of the chord note on the bottom with my thumb here, that's C, and then we have E and G. And if we reorder these notes, it's a really simple process. You just take your bottom note and move it up to the top. So you just move it up 1 octave. And now we have the same 3 notes that make up the C major chord, but it's a different shape. It now has the E in the bottom, the G in the middle, and the C up top. And if you keep going, take that E note, move it up here. Again, same chord, but a different shape and a bit of a different sound too. And then if we do that one more time, take your G from the bottom and move it up top. You're back at root position. And before I go any further, because I forgot to do this at the beginning of the lesson, if you do have questions about anything that I'm teaching here, just hit the Ask a Question button and submit that question so I can answer it on stream here. So yeah, that's inversions in a nutshell, and it makes things a lot simpler to move around. And every chord that you learn, make sure that you're also practicing the inversions, because that gives you so many more options later on in your piano life. So knowing all that, we can get rid of all this crazy jumping that we were doing with that progression, and we can smooth it out a bit. So rather than doing this, big jump, up, jump, huge jump back, we can play it like this. And this gives a bit of a more subtle sound. And look at how little I'm moving my hands. Okay, so I'm going to explain what I'm doing there. My first chord is C major. My second chord, still a G. It still contains all the notes of the G, but it's just a little bit of a difference here. So remember how you take your bottom note and you move it up an octave to change the inversion? I can get the G chord the way you originally saw it in the original version of this progression by doing the opposite thing. So I just take my top note, move it down an octave, and now I'm back in the original G position. Okay, so, but if I play it out here, I don't have to make that jump. It's still a G chord, but it's just right next door to the C chord. And all I have to do in order to move from chord to chord is take my bottom two notes. So I have my C and my E note. And I just move them down one white key each to B and D. And I can keep my G because the G is common in both chords. So now I have to my G chord. The next thing that we got to do is get that A minor chord. So going back to our basic A minor shape here, take your bottom A note and move it up one octave, and now you have a chord that's sort of in the same neighborhood as your first two chords of your progression. So we had our C chord, we have our G chord, and then we have our A minor chord. And all we're doing with the A minor chord is moving every note of our G chord, B, D, and G, up one neighboring little motion. So B, D, and G, just go B, move that up to C, move your D up to E, and move your G up to A. So literally just a little, they're next door neighbors again. So now we have our three chords: C, our one chord, to G, our five chord, to A minor, our minor six chord, and all we have left to play is the F chord, the four chord, and that is the simplest movement of all. All we got to do, because look, we have our F chord consists of three notes. It consists of F, A, and C. So if we go back to our A minor chord the way it was, we have an A and we have a C. And the only missing note is F, and F is right next door to our E note. So to play the F chord, just switch your middle note up one half step. And now you can reset yourself back at the original C. To G, to A minor, to F, back to the one chord C, to G, to A minor, so that is one of the oldest and most valuable tricks in the piano book, learning your inversions. Often when I am learning a new chord progression, I do prefer to practice it in its original root position form, because that way you kind of know exactly what the ingredients are of your chord progression. But as soon as I become comfortable with each of those chords just in root position, I'm always looking for ways to use your inversions and find find the common tones between each chord, because that is a great clue that you can use to swap yourself from chord to chord. Obviously, just like with anything in music, there's no hard and fast rule. You can play, you can play your Let It Be progression with C in root position. If you can play it up here. Or you can move it up another inversion. So yeah, it's kind of up to you how you want to change those chords around. Just remember that each of those chords consists of 3 notes, and you can reorder those notes, and how you reorder them is up to you. So we're going to go back to this way of playing it, and we're going back to 80 BPM, and we're going to start off with those whole notes, and then we're going to get to quarters. Okay. So 1, 2, here we go. To G, A minor, F, F, so this is a lot simpler movements, but pay attention to my fingering here. I'm just going to use my right hand. So my first chord is pretty simple. I'm just using 1, 3, and 5. 3, 5. Then when I move to the G, I'm playing 1, 2, 5. When I shift up to my A minor chord, I'll turn off my metronome here, I'm taking that same fingering pattern, 1, 2, 5 to A minor, 1, 2, 5. And then when I shift to my F, I play 1, 3, 5. So 1, 3, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 3, 5. So that's one way to practice your chord progressions. That's all solid. That means that you're playing each note at the same time. You could also practice it broken. So you can go. This is just each note played individually. You can practice that at a tempo that's comfortable for you, and then build your speed up. Anything like that will help you out a ton, provided you do it in a slow, consistent manner. So let me see here. We got a question from Antal. Hey, Antal. He says, is there a logical pattern to remember to do the inversions, or do I need to learn the notes of each chord one by one? So there's kind of 2 ways to think about it. Frankly, I think the most useful and versatile way to imagine chords is to know each note of the chord, because that will that'll become sort of something that you can use instinctually as you're playing, and it also will help you. It'll help ground your awareness of the melodic and harmonic possibilities of each of those notes in the chord. But you can also use that formula that I was telling you, where it's like you take your 3 notes. So here I am in C. And if you just take your bottom note and move it up an octave, that's a great formula to just get used to the shapes, because all you're doing is familiarizing yourself with the distance of one note to its octave note. But what that doesn't do is give you that awareness of how the chord sounds and why. So we can kind of get into that just a little bit here. The reason why this C major chord sounds like C major and not like C minor or C diminished or anything like that is because of the 3rd note. The 3rd note is super, super important. So if I just play it if I play a C major chord without that 3rd, if I just play C and G, it sounds super open. It doesn't really give you that emotional information that allows you to go, oh, this is a happy chord or a sad chord. You know? But the major 3rd is what gives you that sound. So that's why, to me, experimenting with different inversions will encourage different melody ideas. So one thing that I like to do a lot of the time is I'll start off in root position, and then I'll go to 1st inversion, and then I'll go to the 2nd inversion. And I find the 2nd inversion, if you play a broken 2nd inversion chord, it just sounds really very, very musical. And the reason why is because the highest note in this chord shape is that 3rd. It's the note that you need to give it that major color. And just to exemplify that, listen to what it sounds like if I flatten my E note. So I'm going to move my E note down 1 semitone, and that's going to make it a minor 3rd. All of a sudden it's a massive change in color, and that's because of the difference in the major and the minor 3rd. If you go to F, here's my major 3rd tone. If I make it a minor 3rd tone, so I hope that answers your question a little bit, Antal. Chord inversions are super musical. So if any opportunity that you can that you have to think about them musically rather than just their formulas, take advantage of that, because it'll inspire you hugely down the line. Okay, there was one other chord progression that I wanted to talk about a little bit today, and that's just because, I don't know, maybe I've been kind of into all these Beatles songs lately, and because I've also been playing around with Hey Jude and the ending to Hey Jude. that chord progression we're going to take a look at. This is another like really cool chord progression that I find really just feeds on itself. It's a 3-chord progression, but it's the kind of thing that you can just play forever. It's the final, I don't even know, the final half, maybe more, of the song, Hey Jude, and it just like fades out. And when you hear it live, they just keep going with it because you literally can't get tired of it. You just want to hear it again and again. So what is this progression? It's called the 1, the flat 7, 4 progression, and then back to the 1. So if we go back to our rule book for determining where these numbers come from, obviously our 1 chord, very simple. Very, very simple. If we're in C, that 1 chord is going to be C. Our flat 7 chord, that's a bit of a weird one, so let's count up from C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's my 7th, but I want to make it a flat, so we got to make sure to go down a semitone here. And now I have a flat 7 chord, which in the key of C major is going to be a B flat. The next chord in the progression is the 4 chord, where if we remember back to that original chord progression we looked at, that's going to be the F chord. So 1, 2, 3, 4, there's F. And then back to the 1. So we're going to go back to 80 BPM, and we're going to play some half notes of each of these chords. And then we're going to go to quarters, and then I'm going to show you just some kind of cool scale ideas that you might want to use to, bust out some solos or something on top of it. Okay, 1, 2, here we go. We'll do 2 bars of each chord because it's a bit of a different style of progression. Oh, sorry, I'll start off in root position for simplicity's sake. To B flat, down to F, back to C. Then repeat, so C, down to B flat, down to F, back up to C. So we'll do this one more time as half notes. Then we're going to go to quarters. Okay. So the inversion version of this, the inversion version of this progression, I'm not going to change much because my flat 7 chord borders my 1 chord. I'm going to keep playing these in root position, but where I'm going to change is I'm going to play my F chord in first inversion. So what that means, go back to your root position, bring your F up 1 octave, and now you're where you want to be. So we have C in root position, B flat in root position. Now we have F in first inversion. And now we have a choice. We can either go back up to root position for that C, or we can go down a little bit further. We can go and play our C with G, C, and E. So just take your 2 outside notes of your F chord and just move them down 1 white key. So now it sounds like okay. So we're going to practice that inversion motion now here. 1, 2, half notes. To our flat 7 chord. To our 4 chord. And back to the 1 chord, just like this. Okay? Just the 2 outside notes go down. Then jump back up to root position. Then go down 1 step. Then play your F chord in first inversion. And then play that C chord. This is actually second inversion. Okay? Let's try quarter notes. Down to B flat. Down to F. And then down to C. So that's Hey Jude. Kind of a slow version. Okay, so that's an awesome chord progression. Again, it's featured in a lot of music. So I'll show you a little bit what to do about that as the kind of end to this lesson here. But before that, I'm just going to answer David Rojas's question. Writing melodies, any tips? That's a great question. There's so much. I could do like a whole lesson on melodies. Writing melodies depends on, well, it depends on, I guess, your chord progression, and it depends on if you're in a major key or a minor key. That would shape my answer a little bit, but I can say just as a general sort of kind of catch-all piece of advice that I could give would be think about the thirds. The third note of each of your chord triads, because that is what determines whether your chord is a major chord or a minor chord. And also, don't be afraid to repeat a melody that, like a little melodic idea that sounds good. I think something that a lot of songwriters can end up doing is they overthink their melodies. They need to like continue to expand upon them, and they end up making them too busy. So even if you just go back to that Hey Jude thing, you know, that little motion there, da 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 da, it's repeated, da 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 da, and that's kind of the main like melodic information. And the reason why it's cool to repeat that is because the chords change underneath it. So, So I'm on that B flat chord here, and then I go same notes, but because I switch chords, and now I'm playing my F chord, it kind of gives a new spin on that melody. So the melody and the chord progression, they're like two peas in a pod, and learning how to work with them, finding common tones maybe between your chords that might work as melody things to kind of thread your chord movements together. That's just some things that you can think about as you're kind of writing music or jamming around. Got a question from Labed. Hey, Labed. He says, hey, Jordan, do you have any specific exercises for practicing chord inversions? Yeah, there's two really basic ones. There's basically two ways to practice your chord inversions if you're just playing these triads like this. There's chord practices where you're playing solid, so all your chords together. And that could be something as simple as this. So moving up each of your inversions solid. Or broken, and broken was the each one played individually. And they both build different skill sets at the piano. When you're playing with your solid chords, you're actually building a lot of muscle memory for your spatial awareness, like how far your arm has to move in order to play the next chord. And that's a really important thing to know. And then when you have your broken chords, you're building that spatial awareness, but in addition to that, you're also building muscle strength just for individual fingers. So those are the two most generic exercises that I could offer. But one other thing that I like to do is practice my chord inversions as part of a progression, as part of a chord progression. So if you look at your C chord, the most common chord progression is going to be C, and then your 4 chord, and then your 5 chord, and then back to your 1. So C, then F, and then G, and then back to 1. So you can practice those chord inversions. And then move up to your 4 chord. And then move up to your 5 chord. And back to your 1. So stuff like that helps you not only just build on the chords, but also it's more musical. It's a little less stale to just kind of be playing around with the same chord every time. It's not really musical to do that. And plus it just helps you kind of think on your feet a little more. It's a little bit more fun. So maybe try that out. Okay, so right, talking a little bit about going back to that Hey Jude progression. The pentatonic blues scale, that's what you could use on top of this progression. So I'm just going to outline what the notes are in this scale. Sounds fancy, but it's actually pretty simple. So if I'm playing with these 3 chords, my right hand can play C, D, E, G, A, and then C. Play C, D, E, G, A, and C. That's the major pentatonic scale for your safe notes. So you can kind of consider those to be notes that you can kind of just bust out anytime. then in addition to that, you can also play with the tones within the chord that you're playing. So the kind of weird chord of this progression is that flat 7, because it has this B flat note. So you can just experiment with, you know, like a good exercise or a good mentality to have while you're jamming around is, for my C chord and for my F chord, I can play those notes. I can play C, D, E, G, A, C. But when I get to my B flat chord, I can take advantage of the color shift that this chord provides and play with my B flat, F, and D notes. And then when I'm back to my F chord, I can go back to that pentatonic scale. I can also play the F note because that's obviously the root note of the chord. So that's kind of my mentality that I use when I'm jamming. I also have, you can use little kind of fancy little movements like that. All I'm doing is slipping my finger from the E flat to the E. And then just make up melodies. Okay, so that's all I got for this lesson here. So we went from that Let It Be progression, from the 1, 5, 6, 4 progression, and we practiced that in both root position and in the inversions to smooth out the jumps from chord to chord. And then we practiced the 1, flat 7, 4, 1 progression, which is that Hey Jude thing, and then just that little pentatonic blues scale as well. So if there's any more questions, be sure to get them in. If you find you have a question later, you can just check the archive on Pianote for this lesson, and send me an email if you're unclear about something. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We have another lesson tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Lisa Witt's going to be here. She's going to teach Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. So we're going to get nice and festive in here. But yeah, until then, thanks for watching. I'm just going to jam out a little bit on this Hey Jude progression here.